Authorities say cocaine trafficking into Europe has reached unprecedented levels, and it's not just the scale that's changing, but the methods. As police crack down on traditional routes, traffickers are adapting, using everything from speedboats to offshore transfers to stay ahead of law enforcement. Deutsche Welle correspondent Thomas Sparrow joins us now from Berlin. Thomas, g'day. So European authorities are reporting more and more cocaine seizures. What do these numbers show about where the drugs are coming from and which routes are now most important?
What these numbers tell us is that on the one hand, cocaine production is increasing, specifically in South America, in countries like Colombia, Peru or Bolivia that are at the heart of the whole cocaine industry. What these numbers also tell us is that law enforcement operations are also increasing, so detecting and confiscating drugs that arrive in Europe. Specifically, if we look at some of the routes and some of the main ways in which cocaine arrives at European countries, at European cities, it's important, obviously, to focus on those three South American countries, also specifically on Ecuador. One of Ecuador's ports plays a very important role in the shipment of cocaine to Europe. So you have these cocaine highways, so-called cocaine highways, that link South America directly to Europe. But another important point is that also these routes are diversifying. And what experts are seeing now is that, for example, West Africa is playing an important role in not only what cocaine arrives where in Europe, but in what amount, because West Africa is seen as a main redistribution point. In other words, those vessels that are sent from South America arrive in West African countries, specifically on coastal West African countries, and are then redistributed either via sea or via land towards Europe in smaller quantities. And that's also important to understand. So from a law enforcement agency, they're looking at a very diversified ways in which cocaine is arriving in Europe.
And so how are traffickers changing their methods?
This is where one of the main shifts are happening, according to authorities, because, as I say, you do have these so-called cocaine highways between Latin American ports and European ports. Those ports still remain at the heart of both what the traffickers do and what law enforcement operations are trying to achieve. However, what we're seeing is that these shipments are arriving not only at those ports, but also smaller ports in Europe. So Sweden, for example, is a country that this year registered its biggest detection of cocaine, in particular in one of their ports. So it's shifting further north from Spain, let's say, to other ports in Europe, Antwerp, Rotterdam, Hamburg and other countries as well. But what's also happening, what experts are also seeing, is that some of those shipments are actually being dropped at sea and then taken over by smaller vessels, including speedboats, and then circumventing completely these very big ports, entering Europe via smaller waterways or via coastal areas where policing is not as important, is not as present. And a third change, and also change that authorities believe is very important, is that the way the drug is being hidden is also changing, because even in cases they have detected that the drug has been chemically incorporated into products and then in hidden laboratories in Europe being taken out again and then redistributed.
And so to what extent and how successful are European authorities in keeping up with these evolving methods?
European authorities believe that they are being more and more successful. However, if you look at some of the statistics and what experts are saying, they still believe that a majority of the drug that is transported to Europe actually arrives in Europe. So it's only a small portion that it's actually detected. And what experts say is that law enforcement agencies are normally playing cat and mouse. So basically, once authorities detect a major route or detect a major way in which these traffickers operate, the ways change and then they have to readapt accordingly. But authorities, what they're trying to do is, on the one hand, cooperate internationally. They believe and they see that this is an international trade and that the only way to actually deal with it is internationally, by working with the West African countries, by working together with authorities in South America. And at the same time, what they see and what they believe is that it's for them, it's important to also adapt to how these things, how these methods are evolving. There's a European Ports Alliance, which was launched a few years ago, which is particularly important also in order to increase cooperation, not only between countries, but between law enforcement agencies. So, for example, police, intelligence agencies and port authorities to better detect what arrives at European ports and also stay up to date as to how these shipments and these routes are actually evolving year after year.
OK, Thomas Sparrow there in Berlin. Time now for finance. Here's David Chow.
The latest cost of living update